So my name is Russell McFarland, and this was my fourth year in Pixels. I started in 2016 and came out of the gate as a newbie, made a lot of mistakes. And so that's one of my passions in this hobby is to try to help people do things the right way and kind of get on the right foot as a new person. I think the tendency is to go out there and do a bunch of research and really find out, hey, what vendor do I want to buy from? And I'm going to go out and buy a bunch of pixels and a bunch of controllers and then kind of figure out the rest later. And while that's fun, I think that causes a lot of stumbling blocks down the road. And it really causes people to probably spend unnecessary money and have some stress that they don't need. I found myself doing that as a newbie. I went out there and bought $2,000 worth of things and ended up rebuying a lot of that as I figured out what I was doing. And now still got wasted stuff to this day in my garage that I trip over and regret. So anyway, that's kind of the genesis behind this presentation, is to say, coming out as a newbie today, knowing what I know now, what would I do different? And that's where we're going to say, spend the time in planning and spend the time in research, and then start buying things, and then kind of progress from there. So we'll go over a few things tonight. We're going to talk about gathering information, kind of where you should start, what you should look at, how you should plan. From there, we'll go through planning and vendor selection. Looking at props, some different things about props and some new trends. Cost, how much does this cost? I get that question every year, and I'm sure some of y'all do it as well. With people coming by, they always want to know, how much is your electric bill? And hey, how much did you spend on this thing? And I think that's our question as new folks too, is how much does this stuff really cost? So we'll talk about that. The richness of the community, we'll talk about that, how to get plugged in, how to learn from those who have been there before, and some great resources that are available. I've given this presentation, not the same presentation, but talked through these same things before, and just kind of thinking back and reviewing some of my old notes. It's amazing how much the hobby's matured. We've matured a lot with vendors. We've matured a lot in product. We've matured a lot with different things that are available out there. And it's become a lot easier. It's still not, it still takes a lot of work and a lot of learning, but it's amazing how the hobby's matured even in a few short years since I started. So the first thing I want to say is, before you buy anything, before you do anything, learn what you like. There's tons and tons and tons of videos or displays out there. I would recommend you look at a whole lot of YouTube, a whole lot of pictures, look at exlights around the world from previous years, look at people's displays, and see what clicks with you. And these are kind of pictures that and while these pictures look kind of dated, it's what I did when I researched first in 2016. And I kept coming back to the same kind of themes. I like the big, dense mega trees. I like the clean lines. That was Matt Johnson's house that I think got a lot of us started back in the day. And, I love the pixels. I love the clean lines. I love the arches and how they danced. And that's what my eyes were attracted to. And so you have to decide as an individual what draws you in. Before you start buying a bunch of stuff, just look at videos and say, what do I really like about this? What draws me in? Look at the density of the display. Do you like the traditional Christmas-like look with pixels spaced further apart to give you that more C9 kind of look, or do you like the dense kind of neon look? Look at all those things and consider it, because those will all factor into what you should buy and how you should plan for. So really think about what you're attracted to and make notes and keep a rolling list. So that's what I did. I started, compiling a folder of images and things that I liked. And once again, I kept coming back to the same core themes, and that's kind of where I grew from. So pay attention to your spacing, like I said earlier, and ask people, hey, what vendor made this product, or where did you get this from, or did you make this? And tell me the spacing of your mega tree. People will ask and people answer, and I think you can learn a lot just by looking at stuff and really exploring what other people have, and they're willing to share. So if you ask them, people are generally helpful, and they'll tell you exactly what's going on, and they'll be willing to help. A new thing I think is, if you're really attracted to a particular sequence type or vendor, look at what they've got in there. These things are made to map to any kind of house, and so you don't have to follow their layout and make your house look just like theirs. But if there's certain elements that are a common theme, for instance, Tom Betgeorge has dancing candy canes and trees up front. He's got a lot of candy canes and trees that are a core part of his sequencing. And what I found is, hey, if you really want to go in that direction or whatever, you don't have to, but it makes things easier saying, well, I like to go in this direction. I like the way this music is. I think I'd like the sequence fender. You can even pay attention to those things and maybe model some of your display after that. Once again, I wouldn't replicate my house to anybody else's house, but you can look at those things and pay attention to their layout, and that can make mapping easier in the future. And when in doubt, just ask people, ask them what they did and say, hey, I really like what you did here. What is this about? So the next thing, and it's not fun, it's not, it's not going out there and buying a bunch of new gadgets, but to go out there and really diagram your house, because you don't know how many props to buy, how many lights to buy, how many power supplies to start figuring for until you really get true measurements. I had no idea, how big my house was, how many lights I would need, no clue. And I started ordering stuff. And so what you need to do is start taking detailed measurements of all of your house. So what I did here, and I'll show you different images later, but measure each component of your house. And that way, and I keep these in a folder in Dropbox, and still to this day I use it. I'm like, you know what, I added some things here later on in my subsequent years and said, what are these distances? What can I make out here? What do these windows look like? I went back and added matrices later. And I knew just at a glance that these were 3x6 windows, because I'd gone out there, spent an afternoon measuring things, and kind of really had that stuff documented to where when I wanted to add something and start measuring for lights, because I can go out here now and say, I've got a 3x6 window. I know I want to use 2-inch pixel spacing. How many pixels is that going to be? And it's like, 680. And otherwise I wouldn't know. So I've done my homework. I've gone out there and measured each little bit of my house, and I've got that. So that's very helpful, and that's what I recommend all newbies do, is to go out there and first diagram your house, figure out what you like, diagram your house, and that way you've got measurements to correspond to say, hey, I want my roof outlined. Well, I already know this is going to be 16 foot, that's going to be 32 feet, and I can keep going from there. You've got a good idea of what you're doing. If you don't want to crawl all over your house and you just want a quick measurement here or there, you can go to Google Maps, and this is a satellite view, and you can actually right click on a point and say measure, and then click on the next point, and you can know that this ridge line is going to be 12 feet, and this ridge line is going to be 12 feet. And so you can go out there and kind of get a general idea, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be pretty dang close. If you are just trying to get a quick guesstimate of what you're trying to look for, you can use Google Maps, and that's helpful, and that's a good tool. So another thing is look at where your viewers are going to be. And I made this mistake as well. You stand out in your driveway and you look at your house, and you stand out in your front yard and you look at your house. And what you realize is people aren't going to be sitting in my driveway looking at this thing. And people aren't going to be directly in front of my house looking at this thing, because it blocks everybody else. So really look at it from get in your car and pull up like a stranger would, and really figure out where people are going to congregate, where people are going to sit, and get those measurements. So consider what it's going to look like from that viewing public position. How far is that from the house? Because that makes a big difference in density. You'll hear people saying, I got a 2-inch matrix because I'm this close to the road, or I got a 3-inch matrix because I'm 130 feet away. And so get those measurements. Know how far these cars are going to be away from your home, so that you can kind of get an idea on density and design, and what looks good from that distance. Maybe a bunch of small props don't look good. Maybe you do need bigger stuff, and what looks good from afar. So to demonstrate that, here's my house, and so here's my driveway. And when you're sitting in your driveway, you get a whole different perspective of the house. You're kind of over here to the side. And when I stand in my front yard and say, man, this is going to be glorious, I'm looking at it from a close distance dead on. But if you look at it, I've got this nice cul-de-sac here, and what people do is they all congregate here. Cars back in here, and nobody wants to be that guy. We have a few every year, but nobody wants to be that guy that parks directly in front of the house. So people don't usually sit here. They sit here along this stop sign and look at the house, and they sit here and look at the house. And so that's how I design my display, is I have a mega tree, and I actually angle it towards this direction, so that you can see, because it's 180 degrees. I've got a tree line here now where people can see. And that's how, as I've matured, you really look at saying, where do people sit? What makes sense? Because my first years, this is a swell, and you can't tell it from here, but all of this goes downhill. And so I had many trees all down here in front of the house. And what you notice is, while it looks dang good while I'm setting up here in the yard, once you're up here, you can't see that stuff anymore. It's down the hill and you have to get right up on it before you can see it. And it was a complete waste. And so looking at it from the viewing angle, I brought them up the hill and got them right up against the road. And it's amazing how many people commented the next year saying, man, those are new trees. I'm like, no, I had them last year. You just couldn't see them. And so really look at things from the viewer's perspective and design things that way. Gather your information that way. Look where people are going to be. So I recommend that. And just think about traffic flow and where people are going to sit if you're brand new, because you'll see a natural kind of progression of where people are going to go, and they all do the same thing. So safety is a big thing. Here in my state, we had somebody die this year, decorating for Christmas, fell off of a house, fell off of a ladder, and lost his life. And safety is a big thing. You start, going and designing, had all these grandiose ideas. I started measuring all my ridge lines before I ever decorated and said, I'm going to get on here. But this is a 12 pitch roof. And what I found quickly is you can't get up there safely. There's no way to access the top of the roof in a safe manner. And so as you design, keep safety in mind. And if you got to rent a lift, that's what you do. That's what I did. It's not worth risking your life. It's not worth risking your health over. And, our end of the day, we need to come back inside to our families healthy. And so safety needs to be a big consideration as you plan. And you see that every year. People ask, how can I get up to my roof? Because you buy all this stuff, you plan all of it, and it all looks good on the ground and planning. But once you actually go to execute it, it gets to be a whole different story once you start putting up ladders. And so make sure you're looking at things from a safe perspective. And I can't emphasize that enough. So look at the construction of your house as well. And I made that mistake. I've got an all brick home, and I wasn't really big into drilling a bunch of holes in it. And so I ended up with props. I'm like, man, how am I going to do this? How am I going to mount it? And so fortunately, there's a lot of solutions out there. There's a lot of creative ideas. There's a whole Facebook group dedicated to how you mount props. But think about those things before you buy it. Say, how am I going to get this thing on my house? Or how am I going to stand this thing up in the yard? And it may be the case due to your construction or due to the way you prefer to do things that may not be the best prop. So consider your construction, and to demonstrate some of that, here's some of the things I've done creative over the years. I've got a little bit of standing seam metal roofing. And so I put a bar clamp up there because once again, it's steep. And then I just put a simple wire tie up here, drilled a hole in the spinner, put a wire tie around it, clamped onto that standing seam roof, and it holds great. And that's a way that I can keep them up there from sliding around and going somewhere. And it was a great way to kind of temporarily mount something securely. Once again, I got bricks, so I use a lot of industrial hot glue. I've got a shear bonder, big commercial glue gun that was made for construction, and I use construction kind of grade adhesive hot glue, and it's worked out really well. So I'll take these little command hooks, not use the 3M material, the sticky material, but I'll actually hot glue those onto the brick, and I'll hang core from that. I got snowflakes and spinners hanging from that. It works really, really well. I was surprised how well it worked. Same thing here with my verticals. I've hot glued on these PVC clamps to the house, and they pop right off when you get done at the end of the season. You can pour some alcohol on them and get the hot glue off if you want to. And I did that a couple years in a row. Now I just kind of leave them up there. But anyway, so I've mounted this Boscolio strip to a piece of PVC pipe. And we'll talk about this later too when we talk about the types of pixels to buy. But see here, bullet nodes would have been tough unless I was going to drill the PVC. It wouldn't have laid down. So these square nodes work out a lot better in that specific location for that purpose. And so, we'll talk about that in a minute, is how to pick pixels for the prop. But once again, I hot glued onto the brick, and that gave me a solution that wasn't permanent. Wasn't damaging the house, but it holds up well through the season. Now I've used magnets a lot. So these, once again, it's a brick house. You've got metal lintels over the windows. And so these are rare earth magnets from Amazon. They hold 40 pounds. And so I've got two magnets, if you look here, just holding up each matrix. And once again, you can see from my measurements now that this is a 3x6 window. That's a 3x6 net. And that goes over the windows, and it's held up by two magnets. So it goes up in a hurry. You can put them up in 2 minutes, and then you roll them back up like a carpet at the end of the season, pull the magnets off, and you're done. And it's simple, it's cheap, it's effective, and it works out really well. The obligatory Russell approves thumbs up. So that was this year. Same thing with the matrix material. We had some questions about that earlier this week, and I felt led to put these pictures in there. That's just top rail for fencing. It's top rail, and it's just different fittings from Lowe's from the fencing aisle. And so that gave me a strong, cheap, lightweight material to put my 4x8 matrices on. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and the great thing is people have been doing this stuff for a long time, and they'll put things out there, and you can gather ideas from everybody else. And so no matter if you have vinyl or stucco or brick or whatever, those questions have been addressed, and you can look at what other people did and kind of get ideas. But I would suggest you do that before you start buying a whole bunch of stuff. That way you get in your mind, how can I mount this stuff? How can I, do it without damaging the house? What do I need to buy? And what would work best for my specific construction? So I would recommend that ahead of time before you start buying. So from planning, now that you've got your measurements, you've considered your construction, you've considered the view of the audience, it's time, now you can start really planning things. What you need to decide as a newbie is what can you reasonably do the first year? We look at these 20,000 pixel shows and moving heads, and it looks awesome, but can you really, bite that off as a newbie? Some people can, and some people do, but what you really want to do is not to get frustrated and burned out. Start with stuff you can reasonably attain, and start with your favorite prop, and then complete that, and then start working on it all year like we all do. And then as you complete that, then you can move on to your next favorite prop and keep adding. And then if you don't get to it that year, that's fine. Do year 2, do year 3, and we all grow our displays from year to year. And so really consider what you can achieve as a new person and not get frustrated. So, be reasonable with yourself, be fair to yourself from a cost standpoint, from an effort standpoint, from a learning standpoint. Really consider that before you order 10,000 pixels, 20,000 pixels, just trying to emulate somebody's display that you've seen on the internet. Figure out, like I said, what your number one thing is. What are you attracted to? Like I said, I love those clean lines. I loved how the arches bounce to the music. And I knew that would be one of my first props is arches. I said, well, if I can't get anything else, I'll get arches. And I did arches quickly. And then I said, well, I really need the house outlined, and I really want a mega tree. And so I kind of just grew from there. So do that, and then research what node type goes best for your prop that you want. And so this 10 millimeter Coro, you're only going to be able to use bullets. The square nodes aren't going to sit in those. They would, but it's not a good fit. And so really consider the type of prop you're going to get, and consider the types of nodes you need to buy for that prop. Whereas Boscoyo has these cut out snowflakes, so you can go in there and recess square nodes in there so that they'll fit flusher against the house. And so as you shop for Coro, as you shop for props, as like the earlier picture I showed, and when you consider how are these things going to sit, it's not necessarily one's better than the other. There's no one size fits all. You need to consider what works best for that prop and order the best type of pixel for that. I would never say, squares are the best, get all squares, or, nodes, bullets are all the best, order bullets. It really depends on the prop you're going for. And so consider that so you're not wasting props, or wasting pixels rather. We're going to talk about this more later, but let the vendors do what they're good at. I sat on the floor and tried to solder together a bunch of extension cables and a bunch of pigtails on pixels my first year. And yeah, we can all solder. It's not hard, but it gets really old really fast. And so really leverage what the vendors can do for you. Get the pigtails pre-installed. Get extension cables. Don't sit there with a bunch of, this is personal opinion. People will debate me later, I'm sure. But, don't sit there with a box of Cat 6 and try to solder all these pigtails on. And, what you end up with is kind of a hodgepodge mixture of stuff. And to me, the little bit of money you save is not worth the time, and not worth the fact that you've got piecemealed stuff that's not factory sealed. And that's a personal standpoint. Like I said, I'm sure you'll hear other things from other people, but for me, let the vendors do what they're good at. It's a lot more. It's a lot. That way you can apply your time to learning and building and doing things that you have to do versus sitting there and just doing a bunch of menial tasks. Prop vendors have made life so much easier. They've come out with a whole lot of creative stuff and a whole lot of good stuff that we'll talk about later. Let those guys do what they do. So proper planning is going to save you a lot of money, a lot of headache, and it's going to lend itself to a more reliable show. So everybody wants to know, what kind of controller do I buy? I research this and research that. You can get into giant debates. They all make the lights flash at the end of the day. They all do a pretty good job. They've been asked a million times. You can go out there and research it to death and find out, kind of what people do, what the best thing is for your specific application. But the bottom line is, most people in the exlights community either use Falcon controllers, and Dan Culp's stuff is coming on big time with Culp lights. And so I'd say, from a support standpoint, from a community standpoint, those guys are probably, most people are familiar with those. You can ask anybody questions about those and you'll get a lot of help. Some of the other vendors, people use it, and you can get some help, but from a community standpoint, those are the ones you see kind of come up most often. And I'd say, if I was starting out new, those are the things I would look at. Pigtails has made a giant leap. It used to be, I had tell people kind of pick vendors wisely, because you're married to that pigtail type based off of the vendor you choose to begin with. That's kind of a thing of the past. A lot of work's been put in to try to get a standard, and we're pretty much there. So XConnect is something that's been adopted by most all of the major vendors, and really all of the major vendors. And it's a great format. It's consistent. So that way, if you order from one vendor one year and you say, well, I'd like a bunch of custom stuff this next year and I want to go direct to China, you can do that. And you don't have to worry about your pigtails not matching. If somebody's out of stock and you need another string or two, you can go to vendor B, and if you use XConnect, it'll be there. And so I really recommend, if you're new, that's the only way to go, is XConnect. There's no real reason to go in another direction. That's going to give you the biggest platform to work off of and be the most flexible solution going into the future. If you're established, and I'm a big XConnect guy, ironically, I run no XConnect. I started all with Ray's 13.5 millimeter pigtails, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff with it on there, and I am not going to cut them all off and start over. And that's a personal thing. I don't want to mix and match pigtails, so everything I order has Ray's pigtail on it. So, there's no need to go change things up if you're established. But if you're new, I would go with XConnect. So once you start getting everything in, these are some of my tools of the trade, and I wanted to put this in the presentation because it really, really helps to start labeling your stuff from the get-go, coming up with a good kind of legend to work off of. And so I've got diagrams of the house like you saw earlier for my outline. I've got those numbered, and I know exactly if I put up PVC pipe number 8, I know exactly where that goes on a map, and that way I don't have to fish through a bunch of stuff and figure out, well, this one's 13 inches longer, it must go here, and I don't know where this one goes. Everything's numbered, as well as buy every kind of color of electrical tape you can find and color code stuff. And I do that a lot. That makes everything I use with power injection and an injection point, it's yellow. And then with different size extension cables, I know that this is a 25-foot extension cable because it's red. I know this is going to be a 10-foot because it's blue. And I know this one, with no markings on it's 5. And so as I'm telling people, hey, go get me this type of extension cable, as you're setting up, hey, go get me 2 blues, or hey, go get me a red. And I've got them separated in bins. And at a glance, I know, what I've got in my hand. And sure, I'm pretty familiar with it. I can look at the kind of the bulk of it and tell what it is. But as you're getting people to help you, or as you're kind of putting stuff up, it's really helpful to have those things labeled. So it just takes a tiny bit of time. You can buy a roll of electrical tape for $3, but going out there and pre-identifying all that stuff makes life a lot easier as a newbie. And so do that, label stuff. Here's just another picture. So you can see with my control boxes, I've got them labeled. I've got my outputs labeled 1 through 4. I know these are yellow, so these are my power injection points. So I do that. I put power injection points on all of my controllers, and that way, I've got power injection. If I need it out there, I've got stuff ready to go. And so at a glance, I know exactly what I have, and they're ready to roll. So we get asked the question a whole bunch. Who should I order from? Who's got the best pixels? Who's got the best, Coro? Who's got whatever? And fortunately, there are a ton of good vendors out there. There's a lot of vendors in the hobby that are established. They've been around for a lot of years. And really, it's preference, it's cost. Some, when you order directly from China, and even some US resellers now, they'll customize your pixels, which I highly recommend, from, just an ease standpoint. Like those spinners I showed earlier were 85 nodes. And so I got strings that were made 85 nodes, and I've got, like 6-foot pigtails on either side of them. That way I can just plug them to each other and not have any additional cable I have to use. I didn't have to go in there and cut and solder 100 node strings. It made life a lot easier, and they'll do that for almost no extra, maybe a penny a node extra. And so do that where you can. But there's a lot of good vendors out there, both stateside and international. We've done a survey every year for the past, 3 or 4 years now, and kind of ask people, hey, who do you use? And you can go out there and look those up on the official xlights group and see what people kind of fed back. And once again, there's no bad choices. Hundreds of people, as you can see, use all these people, and they all do the right thing. And so you can just go out there and use who you feel the most comfortable with, who you like the pricing of, who you like the service of. And once again, the hobby's matured to where you can deal with multiple vendors and have the same results. So that's pretty good. So your pixel forefathers, so blaze trails, and this stuff has gotten greatly has greatly improved from where we were. And that really reduces the barrier to entry. So once again, custom strings, highly recommend it. You look at new vendors popping up everywhere, like JDation, who does the custom backer plates. You can go out there and customize a controller plate, in software, and he will custom cut it and mail it to your house. Which huge time saver, huge effort saver, and it looks really clean when you get done. There's a lot of neat hardware out there. It used to be when I first built my mega tree, you'd have to go buy certain bushings and sit there with a Dremel tool for hours and hours trying to, sand out the threads or take it to a machine shop. And now folks like Boscoyo and Matos Designs have come along and said, we'll sell you a kit. You don't have to sit there for hours on end and grind stuff and go to this store and that store and drill, plates. We'll sell you a solution, which really saves a lot of time, a lot of effort, and really cost. If you consider everything and value your time, it saves a lot of stuff. There's a lot of creative Coro options. David Preen put something out recently where he was building these neat pixel cubes, and I think they were costing like several, $100 a piece. And then for him to build it, it was expensive and took hours, and he had to get all these custom brackets and drill all this custom stuff. And I think Gilbert Engineering picked it up and said, you know what, we can make these out of Coro a lot easier, a lot cheaper, and sell them as a kit. And so things like that used to be, a lot of handwork and a lot of effort. Coro vendors and different vendors are picking that stuff up and making it accessible to the masses. And so, there's a lot of neat options out there. P-stakes were another one. David Peace made all those stakes himself and spent a lot of time and effort and kind of put that out last year, and all the vendors picked it up. And the prop vendors made custom Coro for that stuff. The pixel manufacturer made custom strings for that. And you took a good idea, it was really labor intensive, and brought it to the masses by these vendors. And so there's a lot of neat stuff out there. Breakout boards. So I've kind of got hooked on the HP power supplies. They're cheap, they're readily available. You can get them for like 10 or 15 bucks on eBay for 750 watt power supplies. And they're reliable. You can go out there and get a breakout board for another 15, 20 bucks. And so basically for $30, $35, the cost of a Meanwell, you can have a power supply that's over twice the size, or twice the output, not twice the physical size. And you can have that at your disposal. So that's pretty cool. Creative controller options. Once again, the things like the wireless pixel controllers that have come out recently and the small form factor stuff, those are really neat. David Peace's Pixel to Things board made AC and servo stuff more accessible and more affordable than it has ever been before. And so that's a lot of neat stuff that we didn't have just 2 and 3 years ago that you can go out there and implement today with ease. And the regular guy can go out there and accomplish these things with the help of these new vendors. There are sequence vendors for every budget and style. You get everything from the Google Drive, which is rich content that's completely free. And I've got links to that in the resources tab, to the Sequence Armory. Once again, it's a standardized layout, free sequences. And then you've got a number of sequence vendors that have, any kind of style that you'd want that you can go and buy from now. So if you don't, pick up sequencing quickly or whatever, you've got a lot of options out there to get sequences for your display. There's also a new thing cropping up with we got a vibrant 3D printer community, and there's a lot of mounts, a lot of different accessories and things like that, where you can go out and print things or have them printed. You don't have to have a printer. People will actually sell finished products, and you've got a lot of really custom solutions that you can go and get made and sent to you. So that's pretty rich too. So there's also a big trend that I've seen over the last year or two, and you're kind of looking at emerging things in the hobby of how your props look in the daytime. And this kind of came into play with the decor stuff that came out a couple years ago. And now that stuff's getting neater and neater with all the HD stuff. Multiple vendors are doing it, and it looks really slick. And so you can consider that as you buy props, as well as if you don't want to go and spend the extra money on decorated stuff, consider spraying them. This is something that I bought. These are my singing faces that I bought this year. I just ordered black Coro, and I went out there with literally $20 worth of spray paint in about 30 minutes. And you want to get Krylon for plastics or Rust-Oleum for plastic, stuff that's rated for plastic. But I went out there and masked off the bulb from the threads, and just painted the bottom. You just put some newspaper over it, painted the bottom silver, and then painted these bulbs different colors. And like I said, in a little bit of time with a little bit of effort, made these things look a whole lot better. And it's really neat how they look during the day. And that's something you want to consider beforehand, because if you go and push 170 pixels into these things, you're not going to want to go back and pull them out and try to paint this stuff. So as you look at your display, look at things you can spray, look at things you can decorate, look at how they look during the daytime. And some people don't care, and that's okay. But it's something you want to consider up front, because if you see these pictures later after you've populated your prop, that gets to be no fun. So consider it up front. So cost, that's always a big thing. Sure, you can get pixels all day long for 25 cents a node for 12 volt pixels, but that doesn't really account for the whole cost. And so we've done surveys in the past, and this number is still true. The people who keep the best numbers as you factor in all your cost is going to, kind of flesh out to be 80 cents to $1 a pixel. And that's kind of what you're looking at. As you scale up, does it get a little bit cheaper? Probably, but it's pretty interesting how that continues to be kind of a true number because of all of these things. It's not just the pixel cost. It's controllers, it's enclosures, it's pigtails, it's wires, tools, it's hardware, it's all these different things that kind of come into play. Network switches, all these trips to Lowe's that you spend. There's a ton of stuff that goes into building a show, and when you actually account for all of those costs, it gets a lot more expensive, exponentially more expensive than just the node cost. And so those are things to consider. So as a new person, back to planning for a reasonable size display, factor these things in. If you go out there and buy 10,000 pixels, remember that you're going to have to buy props for them. You're going to have to buy, extensions for them. You're going to have to buy controllers for them and power supplies for them. And so it's not just the cost of the pixel. As you look at these things, don't just waste money on pixels that you may not be able to incorporate right off. Use that money instead for the complete cost of the show, and you'll be a lot better off. So learning exlights itself, that's probably 10 xEssentials by itself. So we're not going to dive into all these little minute details, but it's a very, very rich program with a lot of power and a lot of features. And sometimes if you're brand new, it can be a little intimidating. So fortunately, there's a lot of resources out there. Keith Wesley, who's one of the main developers, does a great kind of immersion video every year. He's done one recently to kind of get beginners up to speed, walk you through the basics. Clyde Lindsay puts a lot of stuff out there, does a great job. There's been a lot of different members of the community who are really bright, who've put out previous xEssentials that you can go out there and look on specific things, whether it be AC or singing faces or different aspects of xLights. You can go in there and look at those things. And we also have some of those lessons coming up in upcoming xEssentials. So those are to come. And you don't have to learn from a blank sheet of paper. Go out there and look. xLights around the world, we put out a great sequence every year, and you can see it running on a whole bunch of houses and video. Download that. Look at what's happening. Look at that layout. Look at the different effects and the different props, and kind of analyze, these different layers and kind of say, well, I see what's going on here. I see this effect wiping across, or I see this new shader that's, in this file, and it comes and does this across the house. So look at those things, download things from the Google Drive, the Sequence Armory. All these are free, great resources that you can go out and kind of open up on your own before you even lay out your house. You can open it up with the default layout and really analyze these things and learn and kind of see what's happening behind the scenes. And that's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and learn. So show players, there's kind of two camps. Both are good options. Both are, have their pluses and minuses. There's FPP. So that's a small form factor. It's inexpensive. You can run stuff, it's great for, dedicated mobile props. If you build a top hat, or if you built a mobile matrix, or, anything, that's a perfect scenario for it. People run giant shows off of them, and it does really well. And so it's got a deep feature set, a lot of plugins, a lot of richness that comes along with it. I see it's probably a little bit more complex because of all that. It's a little bit more complex to configure than Xschedule. But once again, it's a widely used show player that has a lot of features, and a lot of people do that. Xschedule is what I use personally. It's packaged with exlights. Disadvantages, it requires a computer. So if you don't have a bunch of computers laying around, or you can get a cheap computer. It doesn't have to be some huge gaming rig that costs $1,000. It can be an older computer that you've got, older laptop that you've got, but it does require a dedicated computer, which has cost associated with it, and you run it from that. I think it's probably a little bit easier to set up, a little bit easier to run, but once again, you'll get a lot of different opinions on that, and we'll get in debates later over this, I'm sure. But both are great options. Both have a ton of users that can help you, and it just depends on which one you want to use based off of the feature sets, based off of the hardware, and kind of what direction you want to go in. So one of the biggest things you can do is get involved. There's a lot of communities out there, and the lighting community is full of some of the most generous, the most intelligent, the most giving and creative people that I've ever been associated with. And so there are a lot of groups that you can get plugged in with, and that will be glad to help and glad to share and glad to kind of go through those things that we've all been through before. And so the Zoom call, what we're doing right now, the xEssentials series is great. It's a great way to learn. You've got a lot of talented folks that are sharing their time and knowledge for the community. And so that's a great way to get plugged in. Ask questions, ask anybody on social media. And I'm going to put a lot of social media links at the end with different, kind of subsets of groups where you can go and learn about different topics. And so I'll put those at the end. And there's also a ton of mini events now. We have one here in this, multiple ones here in the South. I've got one in the Carolinas. There's big ones in Florida, California, everywhere. Texas has a huge community, and there's more than likely one in your state or in your region, a group of local lighters. And that's an important group to get plugged into, because not only can you go and meet in person with these folks and find mentors, but just with our group this year, somebody had a hardware failure that needed a controller, or actually a couple controllers, and reached out saying, hey, does anybody locally have some spare hardware? And like I said, through the generosity of the community and people working together, they were able to get that show back and up and running, within a day. And, that's just kind of how that stuff works. So it's really important to kind of get networked locally where you can, and that's really helpful. So there's a ton of resources out there. I'm going to, kind of put these out there for folks to see later. Exlights.com has a resources page, and there's a lot of resources there. Some of these are a little bit redundant. The manual is actually getting worked on thanks to Scott Hansen and a few others. So that's a resource that's out there. There's a link to that. The xEssentials series we've talked about. The Zoom room, who has, this time of year, maybe not, there's not somebody in here all the time, but as the season goes on and on, you'll see people here towards, September, October, November. The room's always alive with people who are just sitting here with knowledge and resources, and that can help people through problems. And they have saved a lot of displays, the people who volunteered and sit in this room. And that's a big thing. Local groups, we've talked about that. Forums and social media, we've talked about that. And there's national events too. So Christmas Expo is a national event that moves around from location to location. It's going to be in Vegas this year. there's a big exlights contingency there. And there's also the developers come out and do a 2-day intensive class in exlights where you can come and spend 8 and 10 hours a day just learning exlights. And that's a great resource. Transworld has come out in the last year or two with it's another huge national conference that originally started with Halloween and still is mainly Halloween, but they've started a big Christmas subset as well. And I believe that the developers are going to be there as well this year teaching. And I could be wrong on that. I should have looked that up, but I believe that's correct. And so that's another national event. Some of my favorite Facebook groups are the official exlights group, the think tank. PPU has a great community and a lot of videos that come out. I would recommend that. The exlights holiday vendors, so you can see a lot of different people selling things and different resources there. It's more buy and sell centric. The holiday enclosure and prop mounting ideas is what I was talking about earlier, where you can go out there and look at how people mounted things, look at how people built their enclosures, and really get resources and look at pictures there. That's pretty cool. There's a whole group for FPP, and they can answer a lot of your FPP questions. And there's a rich 3D printing community that I'm a member of as well. Jeff Lacey with Can Spader Christmas does a great job with newbies and everybody, really. He puts out a lot of great content on YouTube and has a very lively channel. He does a great job breaking things down in a fun way and keeps things fresh and new, and he's always updating that. That's a great one. And videos.exlights.org, you have a lot of people there with different videos from different sources that you can go and learn. So there's a ton of free sequences and resources on the exlights Google Drive, and I've put a shortened URL there so you don't have the giant long list. That's linked to from the resources, the exlights resources page as well. And then the Sequence Armory is something that came out late last year, done by the think tank, where they have a standardized display and then go map different free sequences to it. And so that way you can have one mapping file and then kind of go in there and adopt a lot of different free sequences to your house using that same mapping file. So that speeds things up, and that's a good resource. So anyway, a lot of information in a pretty quick format. I didn't want to belabor stuff and take everybody's time. We're supposed to keep it under an hour. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. And like I said, I'd love to help answer questions if you got any.